Welcome to this episode of Next Slide Please, a podcast where we try our very best to help non-designers up their presentation game and help designers to hate PowerPoint slightly less.
Hiya, I just wanted to give you a heads up if you're listening to this episode on a platform that supports audio only. We do use visuals in the recording of this episode, so you may want to head over to Apple, YouTube, Spotify, any of the platforms that support video, because some of the visuals are actually critical to understanding what we're talking about. We had a lot of fun making this episode. Andy was in Costa Rica on holiday. He had to contend with mariachis, with storms, with power outages. And hats off to Emma for joining us on holiday as well. But we got it done. And hopefully it inspires you to add a bit more story into your presentations. Today, we're going to be talking about something that's near and dear to my heart. Helping presenters tell a story, for an opening keynote for a conference. I used to do this all day long. I used to help, multiple presenters find the thread between their narratives and come up with a common thread and language that we could use to tie everything together. I think it's really appropriate for us to be looking at story right now, especially because, a 3,000-year-old story, Homer's The Odyssey, is now a blockbuster hit. So the question for us to kind of ponder is, how does a 3,000-year-old story still resonate with audiences? How does it become a blockbuster hit? How do those patterns that we find in story, still have life? And how can we use them? What is that going to, how can that help us build better presentations, right? Because we see a lot in stories. Sophia was just about story, etc. So why don't you guys start by just telling us what you think about story?
I'll go first. So I do consciously think about story, and it is something that my clients do ask me to help with. Not all the time, but some of the time. There's a lot out there on it. So I think this episode will be nice for our listeners to kind of get a bit of clarity about what it is, how to use it, do we need it, why we need it, because there is a lot out there. And I think it can be quite simple, even if it's not a hero story for a keynote speech. I think every presentation should tell a story, whether it is problem, solution, call to action, however simple the line of the story is. I think every presentation should have a story. And I think most people do build a fairly good story, but, I try and help them mostly cut things out rather than put things in. But yeah, we can talk about a little bit more about that later.
Love it.
I think it can be whether you thread it through the entire deck or even just over 3 slides, and within the flow of the entire narrative of the deck. But I think if you start, even if it's a simple thing like start with a statement on the screen that asks a question of the audience, particularly in a pitch, that makes them think. You've got maybe 20 minutes. If you come in with the first slide being, we are so-and-so agency, we've come, or client or business, we come from this location and we've got so many staff, they're asleep already. Hit them with a statement that asks a question of them that brings in some jeopardy that you can come in and fix. And then you tell them a story how you're going to go about doing that. That's storytelling. And that makes that's going to be compelling and memorable and going to set you apart from the other guys who are going to be forgettable.
I love
that's
that.
Great.
Yeah, I love that.
Too.
I think how you tell your story, how you share your information is critical. And if you come up with an interesting way, that's key. I love that, Andy. Yeah. Sorry, Mark.
No, it's good. No, I was just going to say that I think if we all had a top trumps of each of ourselves, and there's kind of like, design, story, psychology, tech, I think my top trump for storytelling would be lower. But I think I've just been building decks for so long that you see it and it's like a pattern. It's like I see the story through kind of osmosis sort of thing. And I think we're going to talk into some really key, interesting information that you're going to go into later. But I think if you just think about how you want your deck to flow, that's kind of already you're starting about your story. Where do you want it to start? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to end? That's really, really basic.
Yeah.
But I think if you just do at least that and think about how it's all going to flow, then without realizing it, you're actually looking at story. And then beyond that, there's a whole world of different ways you could do it. And to Andy's point, you can start with a question, make it interesting. And PK is going to tell us about all kind of different models and how stories started. But yeah, for me, it's just sort of just think about the basics of how your deck's going to be structured.
And also, to use one of PK's phrases, use cases. So you don't feel pressured to have an infinite amount of story built into the deck if it doesn't need it. There are different levels and different requirements for each deck. If you build it in there to the point where you're interesting, that's enough.
Yeah, I think, Mark, you're kind of foreshadowing, to use a movie scripting term, some of the content we're going to share later on. I think there's some really basic things you can do. Like you said, think about the beginning, the middle, and the end. What are 3 images that you could use in those situations? And then we're going to take it all the way out to how do you do frameworks? How do you do narrative arcs? How do you do all that sort of stuff? So there's a wide range in terms of what you can do. And hopefully we're going to share some good tips and tricks for how you can just tweak your presentation to add a bit more story to it, as well as take it the full Hollywood script approach by the end of this. So, I mean, just thinking about Christopher Nolan's blockbuster epic, I mean, what? Yeah, we're not going to give away any spoilers here, but how does a almost 3,000 year old story still resonate with audiences? What is it about those classic stories, about any story, that really connects with audiences?
Before we go there, I think the one thing that jumps out to me is that at times I've read bits of the Odyssey, I've read summaries of the Odyssey, and it's an epic, right? It kind of goes on forever and it's huge. And you think, it's a long film, but he's got that massive, massive story and all those words down into 2 hours, 3 hours. I'm not sure how long it is.
Yes.
But if you think about it, that's already a massive lesson for presentation designers and for people wanting to make their presentation good. Cut it down, cut it down, cut it down. Get the best bits, get the chewy bits, get the morsels, get the real, the key elements of the story, because that's what your audience want. Your audience might not have time to listen to a 2-hour presentation. So get the real juicy bits and make it a highlight. So sorry, I just wanted to chuck that in there.
It's about impact, isn't it?
I love that, because I think the key thing about this version of the Odyssey is that it's Christopher Nolan's adaptation. It's his story. You'll see a lot of the classics professors saying, well, he didn't do this with such and such. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but and he doesn't do that. So clearly he's made it his own story. And I think there's a lesson in that for all of us, in that you need to tell your own story that's true to your own voice. Because the best stories that you can tell. Hopefully people will like them, and there are ways of engineering them so that they are more relatable for people. But you have to tell your own story, and he's definitely done that. I think I would argue that he's done a good job at it. There are things that are missing. I would love to see someone else do it, because that would be another version of the story that I would love to see, right?
I think
Absolutely.
For me, I think the classics, there's something in there that there's quite gritty, like there's lots of conflict, there's lots of problem in it. And I think sometimes, certainly maybe outside of the film world, but in our world of presentations, we tend to kind of sanitize things quite a lot. So we feel quite nervous putting maybe some of the problems or highlighting those problems, because we feel like that might be a negative thing. But I think unless you do that, you don't have a sort of story to follow, and you can't make people feel it, and you can't get them involved in the feeling of, oh my gosh, we need to resolve this, or we need a solution. And I think those classics, they're so gritty and there's so much conflict in it, that I think that's another lesson we can learn is, don't be afraid to put, real problems that you've had or that you've experienced or someone else might be experiencing, and don't sanitize it too much.
That's absolutely true. And after hearing what you guys are saying, I want to have you back on and tell us what you thought of the movie afterwards, because I think that'll be really interesting. I mean, I brought up Greta Gerwig because she's a modern scriptwriter and director. She told a story in Lady Bird of someone trying to actually leave home, not trying to get back home like Odysseus was doing. She actually was trying to leave home and found out what were the things that she really loved about her home in the process of trying to get away from it. She was desperate to get away from it. And it's just a really interesting story. But if you look at her script writing, it's really interesting. It's really quirky. It's what you would think of as being independent film. Sometimes the characters are not even telling you what you want to hear, etc. But the plot and the story is always moving along. And in all these great movies, I think it's interesting to see how every 5 minutes something is changing, something is moving on, and there's variation, there's a cadence, there's a flow to it. And I think that's something that we really can pick up on in our presentation, something we can learn from movies. Are there any movies that you've ever seen that were an inspiration to you for presentation design?
Gosh.
I'm not sure about movies, but what I've just picked up on is the storyline within what you were talking about leaving home. And I when my wife and I first got together, I said, I want to go traveling. And it took me to go all the way around the world with her and then come back home again to realize how good I had it at home, because I'd seen the rest of the world, and the grass is always green on the other side. And wouldn't it be so much better if we went and lived there? Wouldn't it be so much better if we went and did this here? And you go, then you get there and kind of go, oh, right, well, this is wonderful. But once you've been on a journey and you come back home, you kind of go, oh wow, like we got it pretty good actually. And there's so many things I miss about home, and my main, what was in my mind was like I had friends who'd gone and worked in Australia and gone, oh, I'd love to do that. And I went there and I came back and I went, I've been there a few times, and each time I've come back, I've wanted to stay there less and less and less, because I've got a great thing at home without realizing, because I spent all my time trying to get away from there. And when you got away, you came back and went, actually, I've got a pretty good thing going here.
I mean, it's a common theme to stories, and it kind of goes back to what Mark was talking about, the beginning, the middle, and the end. There's usually like a setup for the character, and then there's some sort of conflict or complication that occurs. And then there's a resolution in the end. So in this case, she wants desperately to get out of Sacramento, and get away from home. And in doing so, she ends up running into all sorts of situations and issues that stop her from doing that. And as a result of it, she learns something and grows as a person. And I think when we look at business stories, there's always change is the constant theme of stories. We always want to at least manage the turbulent waters of change. Hopefully we're going to grow, and in business that means that you're going to innovate and grow, etc. And so I think these stories that we see in our favorite movies are ones that resonate in business presentations or in the standard sort of presentations that we have. There's always someone going out, there's a problem they face, they solve it, and then as a result, things are better. That's sort of the typical sort of standard story, ABC kind of story.
So on that, typically, you've got someone who's responsible for change or change management within an organization. They've realized they've got a pain point So that's the jeopardy.
Yep.
They're now looking at a partner to solve that because they've looked internally and gone, we don't have the skills or the resources or the time or both to fix this issue. And it's costing us money or it's slowing down growth. So then we're looking at partners. So when you're building your case to say, we've listened to what your pain point is, we have tools in place and the experience to be able to say, look, here's a case study, here's a use case, here's us fixing the problem for someone else. We live and breathe this stuff. We are passionate about this. We've done this for this person. We've solved the problem. We've seen the jeopardy, and here's the happy ever after ending of that story that we've done for other people. Let us help.
That's good.
Yep.
Just bring it back to the wonderful little things of travel and stuff. Andy's actually traveling this episode, and he's joining us from Costa Rica. And I'm just hoping that the microphone picks up the lovely bands that we can hear in the background.
I was worried about that. I chose.
Sounds amazing.
I chose the garden because it was so loud elsewhere. I was like, no way I can do a recording because all you'd hear is the music.
Just sounds amazing. And then just the movies thing. I haven't got a particular movie I can think of, but I love Hitchcock. I don't know if you've seen many Hitchcock films.
Oh, yeah.
And he always has this thing called the MacGuffin. And it's like a thing. It's a what's it. And it sort of recurs in the story wherever you go. And it's not all based around that, but it's kind of, it's there. I can't think of an example. PK, maybe you can think of one, but that's just a clever way. It's almost like when you're building a presentation, a recurring theme. So you keep coming back to the same theme, even though you're doing the beginning, the middle, the ends, the high points, the low points, but you still keep coming back to a theme. And I think Hitchcock was great at that. And I think that's something you can use.
Repetition is key in stories. If you go back pre-Homer, which is pre, written language, Homer, but you go before that, story was a bardic, what's called a bardic tradition. And stories were very simple and repetitive. They would repeat themselves so that people could remember. And still to this day in the Baltics, and I think also in India, they have full day, if not multi-day, celebrations of genealogy and that sort of thing, where they sing stories about their history going all the way back to their Adam and Eve. But there's a simple repetitive form to that. And we clue into that repetition. If you do it right, it can be really powerful. And if you anchor back to your main point in your story, that's another way to really tie things together and make it consistent. Because just like we talk about how consistency is important in design, consistency is important when it comes to storytelling too. So finding ways to do that sort of repetition where you just kind of hit back on that point, but maybe do it in a different way. Sometimes I'll do in a presentation, we'll look at a point from the point of view of the CFO, but then we'll look at that point of view from that particular idea from the point of view of the CEO, which is a different perspective. So you're shifting perspective each time, but you're talking about that point. That sort of repetition, if you can build that into your story, or even just using an icon, that sort of thing, that helps people remember things. And I think that's a really important point. Keep it simple, keep it repetitive. If you can, tying back to that main point, we always want our presentations at the end to tie back to what we said at the beginning to show that we delivered on that promise as well. So we're even at its simplest, totally. You're going back to what you started talking about at the beginning.
Any good stand-up comedian will often, before they wrap up and say thank you very much, they will come back to the first joke or the first little bit of the story that they when they first walked up the stage and said, "Hello, London," and then they start, they're going to joke, and then right at the end they refer right back to the very first joke that they said, and they went, "Thank you very much, good night." And
do this sorry to interrupt. This is Dave Allen again, right? It's like a little nugget he plants at the beginning of the story that comes all full circle. Yeah, brilliant.
I love that. I brought up this image because this is from the Lasso Caves. This is 17,000 years old. And it goes to show that we love epics, right? This is a painting of a hunt, of a fantastic epic hunt that occurred. And this is a particular stag. I mean, if you look at the stag's antlers here, they're incredible, right? And somebody went to into great detail at how, epic this stag's horns were. And I think while it's important to have something epic happen in your presentation if you can, what's really important is what makes a story resonate with the audience is that it's a story about people. This is a cave painting from 9,000 years ago. And I think anytime we're talking about people, that's where your story is really going to come home, and where you can not just talk about, people in general, but allow the audience to get to be a part of that story and play a part of that story is super important. So we think of that story of Odysseus is this epic tale, etc. But what's really important is the story of a man who's hiding his identity, maybe needs to regain his identity by making his way back home to his family, etc. It's really that human aspect that makes that story so compelling. It is a really complicated story. Aristotle said that it was a sophisticated structure. That's how he described it, and it's incredibly complicated. Scenes within scenes, memories within memories, flash. I mean, it's crazy. I love this quote. In studying some of the classics that I did some research for today's episode, I came across Simon Goldhill's quote, and he said the importance of stories is not simply whether they are true or untrue, but what they do to the listener. And I thought this was really important, because I think often we worry about whether our stories are true or not true, and worry about the facts and all that. Do we have enough facts in a story? We jam pack them with even more facts. But he says what's really important, and if you look at stories from the time of Homer, he said that what was really important was not whether they were true or not, because obviously you're talking about the gods and all these crazy creatures, etc. What was important was what the effect that they had on the listener. And I thought that was just a really interesting quote.
I love this, PK. I feel like if people are really struggling of where to start with story, start with who you're talking to and how you can tell them a story. So don't just tell your version of it. Think about who you're trying to connect with, and maybe where the gap is in their knowledge, or what behavior you want to change. And I think this end bit, but what they do to the listener, I think that's the reason we tell stories, is because we want the listener to feel something or behave differently or remember something. So I love this.
Yeah, and if you think about I always had a tough time when I started telling my kids about Santa, because we always were like, why do we still do that? Like all these years later, and exactly that, right? It's like what it does to the listener. They love it. It's kind of magical. And even though we know at some point they're going to find out, and I hope they're not listening right now, but it's like it's such a lovely story and such a lovely journey that it kind of has a goal and it achieves it. And yeah, I think it's great.
It's funny you say that, Mark, because I have a confession to make. My daughter, when she was very small, I told her that scientists were looking for the 8th day of the week, and they hadn't found it yet. But they're still looking. For a long time, she kept on coming back to that same thing. They found it yet, Dad. So now she thumps me and says, "Can't believe you do." We kept that going for so long.
I think we're talking about emotion and how we're stories create emotions. That's why we go to see a movie in the movie theater. We go to feel something, right? If the movie doesn't move you, then you're going to get up and, and maybe go get some popcorn, or maybe, leave the movie theater. I've left a movie before because it didn't move me.
Yeah, it'll be a pretty short and boring story if they all went out on the boat and they went out and they found something, and then they go, oh yeah, and they got the thing, and then they got back in the boat and they come home again. Right? Short, very boring. No one's going to go and see that. But as soon as there's like calamitous, like, will they make it home? Oh my God, like only half of them made it home, or what have you, or everyone dies, then all of a sudden that becomes that much more compelling and interesting, right?
Yeah. I think this aspect of emotion, we talked about the C's in Sophia, and talked about how Present to Succeed was all about creating those emotions within the audience. And I love this quote from Nancy Duarte. Data tells us what happened. Story tells us what it means. So
Yeah.
I think we're all too common mistake that people make is putting in more and more data to make it more and more believable. But what you really need is a good story behind it to motivate people. The facts are important, but story is what motivates us, right?
Yeah, agreed.
Absolutely.
So the standard story arcs for presentations, there's 4 standard ones that I think we see quite often. There's a report where you have a bit of information, bit of information, bit of information, and then a conclusion. There's an explanation where you're adding to people's knowledge to get them up to another level of understanding about something. There's a pitch where you're trying to get over a hurdle. People don't want to give you money, but you're trying to shoot for the moon and get this amount of money, etc. So you're going straight after it, right? And then there's a drama. We just lost so much per quarter. We need to pull together and do X, Y, and Z to get this done, etc. So you drop people down into that pit. This is a classic. I don't know if you've seen Kurt Vonnegut's story of Cinderella. He does a beautiful story of Cinderella. We'll put a link in the show notes. But these are the 4 sort of standard narrative arcs in story. And people think of report as being really boring, but it can be super interesting if those 3 points that you're making before you make your conclusion don't quite add up to the number that you would think they would do, and then you reveal at the end why they do. It can be a really interesting way to do it. Or if you decide to start with the ending, take a detective thriller approach, and the crime has already been committed, and you work your way back to that origin story. What was it that started everything off? If you just switch things around, like Mark was saying, or Andy was saying, I forget now who, then you can create a pretty interesting story structure, even with something as flat as a report. Do you guys see these quite a lot? Do you see people having problems with any particular one of them, or are there any that you wish you could do more of, or what do you think about these standard structures?
Yeah, seen most of them. It's not so much on the drama side. Wish there was more drama, just because it's more fun.
I think the
But
opening
yeah,
keynotes.
I agree with report. I think the report ones they're kind of fun to work with, because you can make something out of something that seems quite dry and quite logical sort of process. You can still build something quite exciting from that, and I quite like those ones.
Yeah.
I do have a really hot tip actually on this structure you've got on the screen right now. So you come in with you come in with the report. Let's say you bring in some danger or some jeopardy with that. Like, this is a problem we need to fix, right? A bit like that thunder that's about to going off behind me. And then you go through this whole narrative of problem, solution. We are the people that can have the experience and the knowledge to help you fix this. But then the tip is the knowledge or the insight or the one part of the solution you put up on the screen in a big, bold text, white out of an image or a massive statement on the screen. Do not mention that statement. Don't mention it. Only mention half of it. Right at the end, when you say, "Oh, are there any questions?" What do you think the first thing is that they're going to say? And this is a classic. As an Andy Bounds, one of my design heroes, presentation design heroes. This is a thing. He calls it the Grand Old Duke of York slide. You put a statement up there, get them to ask you a question on that, and then you come in with a, "Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. This is a problem that anyone in your industry experiences. We know how to fix that because," and then you quote an insight or a case study that usually nails it because you've gone with the jeopardy, made them ask a question about it, and then you can answer it and then go, "You guys know your stuff. We're going to hire you."
I think you're showing that if somebody has done it quite a bit, then they build up that experience and they come up with interesting ways of doing it. I think a lot of this is kind of like riding a bike. After a while, you go beyond just kind of pedaling and you start being able to pull the wheelie and do all those other cool things with it. Yeah. So I think all of these have their place. There's not one that's better than another. And I think figuring out how you're going to tell that story is half the battle. Aristotle said that a whole has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then that's where the 3-act structure comes from, right? And typically in the beginning, we're telling the story and it's just sort of like somebody's walking down the street and you're describing them. Not much is going on, etc. It's called the setup, right? After that comes the middle, and this is often called the messy middle. And this is where conflict, confrontation, etc. typically happens. And this is where someone's going through some sort of growth. Like the main character will have a facade and they're showing this to the world, but actually they have a really nasty flaw that they're hiding. And that flaw comes out in a certain situation and changes the way they behave. And as a result, hopefully in the end, they learn from it and they grow. And that's where we have that sort of innovation in terms of business, et cetera, or the resolution of the story. And so that's like the basic standard story structure of a beginning, middle, and an end. There are other story structures like 5-act structure like Shakespeare used, but honestly, that was based on human biology. How long people could wait between acts to use the bathroom or go and get some food or something like that, because they were long stories, right? And a 5-act structure is just basically, putting in 2 pieces in between the beginning and middle and end, and actually kind of stretching things out. So in some cases, it can make things even easier. There is no one right way to do any of this. That's one of my favorite things to say is there's no one right way. But there are some ways that are better than others. So you should always be looking for those ways that are better than the other ways. And if we think of standard sort of structure, I think Mark had brought up on another call, situation, conflict, and resolution is what a lot of people will use. There's a ton of these. There's a million different ways. Nancy Duarte's got what is, what could be, and then a new bliss as the 3-act structure. Some people apply why, what, how, what to Simon Sinek. I don't think he actually ever kind of pushed that as a 3-act approach to story, but people apply that to him. In business is often the problem, solution, benefit of case studies. Barbara Minto's famous for her situation, complication, question, and then an answer, which is the solution to that. So as a way of structure. So the reason why do we have structure? Why is structure important?
I'm going to jump in with an answer to a different question. And I think this is why some people get worried or a bit overwhelmed when they hear story and having to bring story into their presentations, because there are so many frameworks out there.
Yes.
That I think there's a bit of like decision paralysis. So it's like, I would know what I want to say and I know what I want to happen at the end, but it's kind of like, how do I slot it into all of these? And they all look similar, but which one shall I use? And I think people just get a little bit overwhelmed, because even on our slide that we've got in front of us now, there's a lot on there.
There's a lot. There's a
yeah.
lot. Yeah.
So I was going to say, listeners, don't panic about like which one of these you're using. It's, figure out who you're talking to first and what story, what things you can put in there, and then see which one might fit. So don't try and shoehorn things into a particular framework. Yeah.
If you want them to go on a journey with you, how are you going to get them to follow without the structure? Otherwise, you're never going to get them to follow you from the beginning to the end, or the beginning to the middle and the end.
So, yeah, I mean, I think structure makes it easier for a presenter to put together their information. It's the last thing we want to do. People want to jump into building slides. They want to start writing their script. They want to do a million other things, but just figuring out what are the 3 things you want to say. How are you going to open? How are you going to close? If you do that, you've got enough structure to then figure out, I want to do this with it, or I want to do that. I want to switch that up, or I want to bring in this bit of information in here, and I'm going to leave that out until there. Just figuring out, those 3 bits of information you want to tell, and then how you're going to open and close is good. Figuring out the what, the why, and the how is also important for those 3 bits of information. Yeah. If you can figure out the why, I think so many subject matter experts forget about the why. And the reason for that is because we spend so much time helping people do something that we focus on the what and the how all the time. But the why is so important. And if you watch Simon Sinek's video on the why, well, the why is what's at stake if we don't do this. That's what's really going to get people to do something. So figuring out the what, the how, and the why of each of those 3 things that you want to talk about, and then figure out how you can open and close. You're good. That's enough structure, honestly. Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, I think having a structure in mind really helps, because we've all had clients and probably done it in our own presentations where we really don't want to cut anything because we're the expert and we know the story and we know this and we know that. And there's that real sort of loss aversion because we don't want to take anything out. But I think having a good structure or framework really forces you to question, like, is this adding to what I'm saying? Or is this adding to the drama? Is this getting me to the next part of my story? And I think that can really help with cutting things out and thinking, do I just need a big stat or a big statement in this point? I don't need the whole chart, or I don't need, the dashboard. And I think, this can be a really good way of communicating with my clients on how it's going to work better if they do it this way. Because sometimes it's hard to communicate that when they don't want to cut stuff out. You can sort of show them how it could be structured in a more sort of positive way, rather than just saying take something out because you don't need it. I think it can be equally good to sort of help communicate that.
I think it's also you need to ask them a question, which is, what's the one thing you want them to take away from this slide? Yeah. What's the one thing? What's the most impactful thing? Because if there's 6 things on this slide and they're all speaking at once, they're not going to take the one thing away. And then once you get them to agree that it's that one thing, then they're going to go, oh, right, well, maybe we should split this into 2 slides or more.
Yeah. And I think to Emma's point about cutting stuff, if you sit down and do a little bit of homework before you start and figure out those 3 things, figure out the what, the why, and the how on those 3 things, your open and your close. If you do it that way, you can actually grow it from there. And so instead of cutting, you're actually growing. And I think that's a much easier process, to be honest with you. It's harder to sit down and sit with a blank page and start writing, right? But in the end, it's easier than cutting and having too much stuff. And as subject matter experts, I think most people have too much to say. So a little bit of guardrails help. And you can shop around a framework And if people say, no, you need to change the third box, you're not having to redesign a slide. You're just changing some text. It's so easy. It's really so easy to shop around your idea and figure out whether that story is going to be good or not, or whether you need to add something or take something away or that sort of stuff. That kind of reduction is so much easier when it's an outline. Can I go deep on this just for a minute?
Please do.
So this is a storyboard that I created for an analyst for a breakout presentation. There might have been 150 people in the audience, not a huge audience for a conference presentation, right? But we sat down and figured out, you'll see the middle section here, the middle 3 columns are those 3 points that he wanted to make. And we figured out, it doesn't show in here, but we figured out the what, the why, and the how for each of these at a later date. He's just figuring out his main points for each of these 3 points, and then figuring out what data he's going to bring to bear to prove that point. And you've got that whole core of your presentation done, right? Then you just have to figure out what would be an interesting opening for this. And in this case, he's like, we're going to hit him on the head and tell him Comcast lost 33,000 people in 1 quarter alone. He's going to knock them over the head and take a dramatic approach. And then he's going to help them figure their way out of that pit. And that helped him figure out his position on the stage, helped him figure out his pacing in terms of the language that he was using, where he was going to be getting emotional, where he's going to sit back and just kind of relax and calmly walk through those points. And it actually helped him figure out his narrative arc, which you can see here, which we actually would overlay over the top of the storyboard, so that before he got up on stage, he already had a plan. He had a strategy for how he's going to deliver that, right? If you combine this with then thinking about how you could do those soft breaks we're talking about. One case, I had a chap who was talking about customer call centers and how no one ever returns your calls. And he came up with this idea of taking ping pong balls with him up on stage, and he threw them out into the audience. And people were just kind of sitting there wondering what the heck he was doing as he was talking and throwing these ping pong balls. And people started throwing ping pong balls back, expecting him to catch them. And he just kept going with a totally straight face and did not catch any one of those ping pong balls. And then at that point, he figured it would take about 5 or 10 minutes. At that point in his presentation, he said, we've all been there where you put in a call to a customer call center and they never give you a ring back. And everybody in the audience was like, oh my God, right? And so doing a little bit of structuring like this and figuring it out beforehand helps you figure out what your delivery is. But also, when it comes to the visuals, you know that you just need to put a big number up there, like 85% of your calls are not going to be returned or whatever the number is, right? You know that you can put a face of a person who's worn out on the telephone and get that message across, right? You know what those visuals are going to be. And it just literally kind of falls into place. So this is where structure helps presenters. I'm not saying that everyone should do this. Most of you are not going to want to do this, but hopefully this kind of gives you just a view onto where you could go if you wanted to, right? And
the overlay thing is great. Right, just give an indication of pace. So we've spoken in previous podcasts about, or previous episodes, I should say, about people's different levels of ability to stand up on stage, to people's different confidence levels. So giving them this to go, actually, I can stepping stone or milestone my way through this and get to chunk 1, phase 2, phase 3, what have you. Is going to give someone a chance to go, actually, I feel much better about going out on stage now. The ping pong balls things adds a bit of theatre, obviously, and not everyone will be able to do that. But giving someone 5 steps to get through from the beginning and the end, awesome. Love this, okay, this is really good. Anyone listening or watching this, as you say, they might not go to the same level as this, but they might do their own version of this and find that they can navigate their way through something that doesn't come easy to everyone. And that's why we're here, right? We're going to help people to take on this stuff that not everyone loves doing. That's well done.
I love that word that you used.
Hat tipped.
Cheers. I love that word that you used, chunked. information, because
Totally.
that's what structure does. It helps you break it down into bite-sized bits. It helps your audience navigate your presentation when you're delivering it, but it also helps you build your presentation, right? It makes it so easy. And coming up with this approach is how I was able to build a presentation in like 37 minutes was the quickest one I built, because we already knew what the bits and pieces were, and we just kind of dropped it onto slides, a bit of text, a number, a picture, something like that. That's all you really need to get your story across. And the key thing about script writing is it's visual storytelling. What we do in presentations is visual storytelling too, right?
Yeah, and I love this because I think our listeners and people who are watching as well, you can see that there's so much more that you need to think about before you even open or look at a slide. And I know we probably say it on every episode, and again, like Andy said, it doesn't have to be to this level, but just have a think before you open PowerPoint, because there's another psychological barrier that all of us and all our clients will probably have, when it comes to storytelling, is that it's that present bias. It's like, I need to do something productive. And it feels more productive to open PowerPoint and start just typing stuff or like copying and pasting stuff. But we need to kind of stop that and just do some steps before, especially if we want to build a good story. Something like this is a brilliant visual to sort of show people what they should be thinking about before they even think about what's going on a slide.
Totally.
Absolutely.
I think, what is your desired outcome from this deck? Work back from that. What's lead by fear if you need to, or lead by jeopardy, and bring in the solution, and that gets you to that. And then if you can bring in something that is incredibly memorable, emotion led, or something that is going to make people go, oh right, yes, now I get it. Then the ingredients right there to nail it. It's difficult to get it right every single time, but if you can find those bits, that's going to get you so much closer. And that's how PK did. If you got that, I said PK got it done in 37 minutes because the template is in place, the design structure was in place. They worked out the story and it just went done.
So I just wanted to bring up this particular video. We'll provide a link for it if you want to. This is Paul Schrader. He's a scriptwriter and director, etc. He's known for a lot of 1970s classics like Taxi Driver, various other different movies. And he actually doesn't like the 3-act structure. He doesn't think that that's the way to build a great story. He loves to figure out what the problem is and then push that into a really interesting metaphor. So in the case of Taxi Driver, you've got somebody who's antisocial, and we're going to put them in a yellow cab out in the world where they're going to have to meet a bunch of people. And what happens as a result of that? And he's got a story as a result of that, right? And you can see outline is step number 5 in his process. And I think he goes through 5 different outlines. And he's at, I think, 75% of the way through his script writing class before he even lets anyone start writing a script. And that's because they've outlined it to death, right? So he does like outlines and using frameworks. He likes going with the story part of it first. So there's no one right way to do this. If you've got a great story and you know what the bits are and you can figure those out and play with them, then you can go that approach as well. So I think what we should do is help people figure out what are some simple ways and what are some more advanced ways that we can bring story into our presentations.
So my sort of tip or takeaway is more changing your mindset around story. So I think a lot of people have a narrow idea about how story can be used in presentations, especially in business. I mean, pitching, I think people get that they need to build a story when you're pitching. Yeah. But even for internal presentations and all sorts of other presentations that we do every day, all day, every day, we can still build story into that. And I think we can still have the same approach to our decks, where we're thinking about it before we build it, especially even if it's something like an annual report or, you know, some survey results that you've got from a good study that you've done, you know, it can all start with a good story framework and a good story structure, because you don't have to, I think people think they have to add a story. So they have to have a kind of anecdote or something kind of funny that they've added, and that means that they've got story. It doesn't. It's that logical sort of process and flow between what people know now and what you want them to know at the end, or what you want them to feel at the end. So I think that for me, it's changing the mindset around story and how it does apply to everything. So when we talk to our friends and we're telling, you know, something happened to us the other day, we're telling a story and we're kind of building it up. We could just tell them the facts, but we don't. We tell them a little story. We give them some tidbits and build it up a bit. And I think even, you know, very dry content should be structured around a story, start, middle, and end.
So I love that, because what you're saying is structure is story.
Yeah,
right?
I agree. I think so.
So what about using an image full screen? Can you give me an example where a full screen image has like really added to the story, or allowed people to just a moment to pause and think about what someone's talking about?
Yeah, I work with a charity it was quite an emotive topic, social issue that they were trying to help with. And I think we used a lot of imagery in that to tell the story, because it kind of spoke for itself. And the lady, the founder, was so passionate. She didn't need words behind her. She just needed pictures, and she just spoke at the pictures. And yeah, I think it's so powerful.
I would add to what Emma was talking about in figuring out the structure and how people get scared about story, and how it can be simple. I would say that we often put too much into our presentations, not just on the slide, but when it comes to story.
Okay.
David Mamet, who's another famous screenwriter, said that the more you tell someone about a character, the less likely they are to connect with that character or like that character or be interested in that character. You don't have to have a complicated story. It can be simple, and you don't need to tell them everything. In fact, it's better if you don't tell them everything. If you don't give them too much information, you allow them to just kind of fill it in, because then they'll be able to put in their experience, put in their perspective, etc. Right?
I love that. And there's that narrative transportation in the story as well. And I think those gaps really help that, because you fill in the blanks with what's important to you or what you've experienced before maybe. And I think, yeah, that really helps.
Going back to back to your point about the charities, Emma, and the full screen image, you put that on the full screen image up on first. And then that tells that's depicting a story all by itself, harrowing image from their image library. And then you stand there and go, stat 1, big number, like so many people are in trouble for whatever reason. Stat 2, another big number comes up on screen. We are struggling to be able to fulfill blah, 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 because we need funding. Stat 3, we need this much money.
It's like 40 towers.
Power's gone out now. So,
oh
there we go, back on. Yeah, so that in itself is extremely powerful. You're going to win hearts and minds with that, and then you're going to hit them with some numbers straight afterwards over the top of this that harrowing image. Extremely powerful way to present.
So what you're doing there with that image is creating a scene, right? I mean, if we think about our presentations, quite often, if you're building a pitch deck for Nike, Mark, I mean, you've probably got a big hero image of a pair of shoes at some point where you get everyone to imagine what it's like to be running around in those or playing basketball or whatever, right? And you have those scenes. Those are the points where you want to put in a lot of investment and time in terms of building visuals and building the narrative. And then the other parts, you have what we call summary, which is what most templates are really good at, which is just kind of listing the facts. If you think about a good movie, there are moments that are just kind of filling you in on what's going on and who they are and where the place is and all that sort of stuff. And that's the summary. And then you get to a scene which tells you what it actually really means and what's going on, right? And with presentations, if you develop your presentation as a few scenes and the rest is just summary, that can make it so much more efficient for you when you're building it and so much easier for the audience to consume, because they can recognize when something's summary and when something is an actual scene. And if you then break out that scene into bits and pieces, in our case, slides, rather than just one gargantuan slide, you can make it digestible so people can walk through each one of those steps that you want to get them to. So think about those scenes, think about everything in between as just being summary, and don't spend so much time on that, but invest time where it really pays off, where you've got that emotion, where you're landing your key point, a fact or a figure or something like that, right? I think that's another way to help build story into your presentation.
Good stuff.
What about finding that red thread? Have you ever sat down with a presenter and looked at the deck and realized that they didn't even know what they had going for them? That they had a story in there or some information that they weren't even picking up on, and you help them reorganize those slides in such a way that it made more sense or landed with more emotion, right?
Yeah, I got a great example of this. I had a client that had an image full screen, but they just had too many words on the screen. And this is a classic case of you're not going to read what's on the slide and listen to me at the same time. So I said, right, put all those words that are on the screen in the notes. Okay, that's where they're going to live. And then we're going to just pull the key points out, and I just turned it into a diagram. And I had 5 icons on the screen, 1 in the middle, 4 around the edge, and had an arrow pointing in one after the other. And as they appeared on click, and he just said, "Oh my God, you just summed up what we do in one slide."
Nice.
Just by having it as a diagrammatical thing. And he thought he needed it in words, and he thought he needed it in whether the words on the screen or whether their words delivered as audible as he stood up there and spoke. And he just hadn't realized what he had on the screen. And we turned it into a different way of doing it. And he just went, "Oh, this just frees up so much more time." And we cut down the amount of time he needed to be on that slide, which gave him more time elsewhere to focus on the real message. So it's just how you organize that story and how you put it together. Because the story doesn't necessarily have to be across the entire deck. You've got a mini story in one slide.
Love it. Yeah, if that's a key bit of information that you need to land, you should break it out as a mini story, either through animation, like you're saying, or breaking it out across slides. I think that's a really good approach. So we're going to put a link to some videos, I believe, in the show notes, and we'll also link to some of these books. Emma, you suggested Storytelling Animal. What is it that you love about this book?
It's kind of got a psychological angle, which I like.
I figured.
Yeah, exactly. But it picks up on something you brought up earlier when you were looking at the cave drawings and those sort of things back in the day. It's like we are natural storytellers, and that's why he calls us the storytelling animal. But it serves a purpose for us. So it's psychological purpose, a social purpose. And I think we've come to this age where we're all about information and organizing information in a logical way with data. And I think it sort of shows how we naturally tell stories. And I like it. He looks at everyday life. He'll look at like sports, film, like how children play, things like that. And it's just a really sort of comprehensive way of looking at humans and how they tell stories.
Cool.
I'd like to add to this one if I could, and that would be, I mentioned him before, check out The Jelly Effect by Andy Bounds.
Okay.
That's an excellent book. And it's called The Jelly Effect because it's about how to make it stick.
Okay. Cool.
Nice.
We'll add that. Yeah, Dan Rome, that's an old book. It's one I would still recommend. I mean, I think you can pick it up cheap. It talks about very basic, what he calls a PUMA, presentation underlying message architecture, I think is what it is. It basically looks like a cat. And you've got two legs that you're standing on, which are the data points that you use. And then you have the story going from head to tail. And he breaks it down into a really basic structure. So if you want really basic structure, I would check out Show and Tell. It's a super old book, but I think it's still worth a read. And that was
Oldie
something
but a goodie.
yeah, that was something that set me off on this whole journey of getting into story. Obviously, I mean, we've all got our favorite books. Like I couldn't find Illuminate by Nancy Duarte. That's another really good book. I would say watching some videos on YouTube. There's a ton of great videos on YouTube, and maybe we can supply some links there too. And Will Storr is here, who was at Present to Succeed. If you didn't get to see that in Sophia, then he's got a great book here as well. And Terry Suplat, who was Obama's speechwriter, talks about really simple ways to connect with your audience and make your story more memorable. That's a great book. Again, he's got some videos out there on YouTube that you can check out too. Cool. Any final thoughts? I mean, are you feeling more excited about story now?
Always.
Yeah.
I think
Totally.
always did. Just didn't realize I was doing it to the same level that you do. If that makes sense. I was doing it in a.
I like that we've brought in the film.
I think so. Obama, masterclass in realizing that you don't have to just speak. He puts in epic pauses and allows it to sink in, allows the point to stand, allows you to process what he's just said. And before he delivers the next line. And most of us, me included, when you start practicing, you're going at 100 miles an hour. And I practice in front of my wife and kids and they go, slow down. And it's just a natural nervous reaction to go too fast. I speak fast anyway, but when I'm nervous and in front of a bunch of people, it's whereas just channel your inner Obama.
Love it.
Love it.
We've all got an inner Obama.
I need one. Terry Suplat talks about how Obama was not a good speaker at the beginning, and it took him a lot of work. I think all of this takes work and take some effort. The more work you put into it, I think the easier it gets. I mean, those frameworks that I was showing you before, once you've done a couple of them, you can do them while you're walking your dog in your head. It's just the first few that you do that are kind of painful when you're writing them out on paper. But afterwards, when you learn that kind of structure, this stuff all becomes easier. It's just like, like we talked about riding a bike, it becomes force of habit. Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, so that's it for this episode of Next Slide, Please. Thank you so much for listening. You can find us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon as well now. You can't get away from us. And you can find me at birdboxdesigns.com, also LinkedIn and Instagram.
You can find me at sixmileshigh.com or on LinkedIn or Instagram as 6mileshigh.
You can find me at pkdigital.net or on LinkedIn, PK Stefan.
And you can find me at andybundock.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn and on Instagram too.
We'd love to hear from you. We're a friendly bunch. Anything you don't like, tell us. Anything you do like, please tell everyone else. See you on the next episode of Next Slide, Please.